Associate Dean for Clinical Research at Duke University School of Medicine, which is also part of the Duke Clinical and Translational Science Institute, similar to our CCTST. After spending time in public health and clinical nutrition, Denise started work at Duke as a clinical research coordinator in 2000 for NIH-funded trials in oncology. In 2009, her research management team in the School of Nursing received support for Duke's CTSA, which is our CCTST, to leverage the group's services and launch REDCap for the School of Medicine. For 11 years, Denise has been the Associate Dean for Clinical Research for Duke University School of Medicine. In this role, she leads the Duke Office of Clinical Research, a central support office of expertise in coverage analysis, study logistics, data management, regulatory oversight, workforce innovation, and guidance for clinical research operations for Duke as a site. I'm so happy to have Denise today. So kick us off, Denise, and help us celebrate Clinical Trials Day.
Yes, welcome. Well, thanks for the warm welcome, actually, and that really nice introduction. I appreciate that, Stephanie. And I actually can say I have visited your site because you hosted REDCapCon, I think back in 2016, maybe. I can't remember exactly the year I was there, but I feel like that was the year I was there. So I did actually get to visit your site before. So I feel at one with the REDCap folks always, because I really feel like that helped launch kind of my career at Duke beyond, just the clinical research trial work that I had been doing. So happy Clinical Trials Day, which is tomorrow, but of course we're all celebrating today. We sent a big message out to all of our teams and all of our clinical research folks today. Today, I'm just going to go through a bunch of things. My timeline, just to kind of give you a feel like, who the heck is this person and why does she care so much about clinical research professionals? A little bit about our infrastructure and building trust across our institution, the work we've done on changing the research culture, barriers to recruitment and retention of staff, PI engagement, the AMC socio-technical ecosystem, which is actually from one of the papers that was worked on as part of the CRPT that Stephanie mentioned, which is part of ACTS and all the other work that we do. And then what's at stake if we don't do something, and then hiring. I'm going to just touch on hiring. I have a firm sort of a saying around, I really want good humans. I certainly want talented people and people who are highly skilled, but a lot of times I can teach skills. But talent and good humans are hard to find. And if you're really great at something, that's awesome. But if you're not a good team player or toxic human, not good for the whole team. So, all right. So I am just going to focus you in on what I was doing back in 2000. 2000 to 2007 is going to be my next slide. And that was really when I was a coordinator and doing a lot of this work that we're talking about. And then here in this time frame, 2007 to 2012, I kind of get into clinical trials, project management, data management, took on REDCap for the institution, as Stephanie mentioned, and really started to evolve my career. I've been heavily involved in the American Dietetic Association, which is actually called the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics today, but mostly in the oncology nutrition space. I actually was a board certified oncology dietitian for a little while, but I don't see patients anymore, and those types of things have to go away when you're not seeing patients. So anyhow, let's go ahead and get started. So in clinical research in 2000 was an interesting time. I can remember taking this job at Duke and thinking, I'll stay for a couple of years. I'm going to go on. I'm going to go down the street to UNC and do my PhD. That was my plan. I had my master's already. I'd come out of Penn State and I was doing public health work, and I didn't think I was really going to end up in this space, right? So that's why I tell people, like, you can plan a little bit, but you really don't know how your career is going to evolve. And sometimes it just takes different twists and turns for all kinds of different reasons. But I worked primarily with diet and exercise studies, which kind of makes sense, right? Because I'm a dietitian. All of our studies were interventions, mostly in older adult populations, actually. So I've learned a tremendous amount in that space. We focused a lot on physical function. We really wanted to intervene at a time when somebody's diagnosed with cancer or they're well beyond, even in like 5 years plus, we really wanted to keep sort of retaining that functional status. And so with our interventions, we were able to do successfully do some of that, at least attenuate that decline that we typically see with aging, which will happen to you no matter what. So you try to intervene by, doing strength training and things like that. So I was this, I always like to say I was a unicorn in the space of clinical research. I would run things down. I stayed ahead of the game. I was running all these studies and I loved it. And I was really good at it, but I was working a lot. And I had really no idea where the career was going. And honestly, from my standpoint, I still in the back of my head thought I'd stay a couple of years and I would go on to grad school. Well, one thing led to another, and we got another study funded, get another R01 funded, and then another one. And suddenly I found myself being the person who knew everything about all these studies and nobody else behind me did. So I had lots of documentation, but if I stepped away, the whole house of cards, I used to say, was going down. The PI was going to be like, where is all this stuff? I have to find everything. Because I was like a library of information. And even though you have all these documentation, it's just really difficult to take a person who really knows how to run everything and then suddenly find somebody else who can just step in and do that. So I really felt like it wasn't a great model. And I would bring in a research assistant. Almost every year I was hiring a new research assistant. They would stay literally for 1 year. They're like, there is no career path here. I don't see any way around this. There's nothing here for me. They would go take another job. Hopefully they stayed at Duke because I did impart a lot of Duke information on them, about how to work with the IRB and all those kinds of things. But, sometimes they would just leave and get frustrated because they really didn't know, I don't really see a career path here. And to be honest, I didn't see one either, but I was really involved in my oncology nutrition professional group. And I had all of that work going on at the same time. I became a chair of the practice group. So that was a 3-year term. I got leadership training through the academy. It was really good. And I really enjoyed my team. It was very cross-collaborative. We had exercise physiologists, faculty on our team. We had cardiologists on our team. I had a PhD level RD. So it was, and we had psychologists and psychiatrists. It was phenomenal, the group of individuals that I worked with. And I just was around all these really smart people. I felt like all I did was learn from them. So that was great. And they were really supportive of me because they really recognized my role as the central person who kind of kept the whole thing running. At that point, I was probably moved into a clinical trials manager job. I wasn't in that entry-level coordinator job, but I was 6-7 years into that before that ever happened, right? So, and I found it was really tough to build out that team because, as I mentioned, you had one coordinator or one assistant, and then they'd leave, and another person, and they'd leave. So I really found that was difficult under one PI because they were very nervous about funding. Like, what happens if we don't get another grant? Then I'm going to have to let that person go. They're not going to have enough funding. And I thought, wow, this is a terrible funding model for staff. Like, if I come to you and I say to you, hey, you know what, if the next grant doesn't get funded, you might be out of a job. That person's like hightailing it, as they should. They have to be concerned about their own financial stability in their job, right? So there was that. And then the no clear path for growth. So here's the PI I worked with. Her name is Dr. Wendy DeMarc Fried, and she is a PhD RD. And we were very, both very strong personalities, I will just say. And she was strong at the PI level, like any PI can be. And I was also equally strong in sort of my space of logistics and how to do things and what it takes, and really kind of just taking care of business to a point where I think at times she had no idea how much had to be worked out to do like the one idea, right, that was expressed, or the one thing that she wanted to do. So I ran all that stuff down. So here's me. This is actually me probably before 2007. I was pretty young when I took the job. I think I was 28 when I took my first job at Duke. So I labeled this do-it-yourself research. And what we did was we found out the answers to all these different things that we were working on. And I kept saying to myself, that just seems like a a reinvent the wheel model and not very efficient. So I said, okay, I built a little research management team. And part of the reason that came about is the School of Nursing had a P20 grant at the time. And I was in the nursing school, was probably the third department I ended up in. We had been in surgery and we had been in our oncology center before that. And anyhow, I ended up in the nursing school, and the nursing school says, hey, this P20 is going away. These 10 people are going to lose their job or whatever. And I was like, what do you mean they're going to lose their jobs? That's a terrible thing. You know, they're going to start jumping ship in the next 6 months because the grant wasn't ending for 6 months. And I said, well, we don't have any funding for them. And I said, well, you know, oddly enough, I have funding. Wendy in 2007 decided to leave Duke. She went to MD Anderson. She's now at UAB. And another PI I was working for, who was on the same team with us, actually passed away from pancreatic cancer. So we had this like all of a sudden pivotal moment in our research enterprise of our team that we sort of all took a step back and said, well, what am I going to do next? And for me, I started saying, oh, well, maybe I'll go back into be an oncology dietitian. And I was really, like, again, very active in that space. And I really liked working with the patients, and I loved oncology, nutrition. So I was looking at that. I also had this idea in my head that perhaps I could take that team, and maybe I had all this money, right? All this funding, all these projects that needed to get completed because everybody had left and it was stuck up under me. So I was like, okay, well, maybe I'll take this team on. I'll give them work to do. I'll see what they can do. And in the meantime, keep their jobs whole. And then I can work on this concept that I kept saying needed to be done, which is a shared effort model, right? If you're, a brand new faculty member and you don't have a research team, how are you getting help? You cannot afford to buy a whole person to work for you. And definitely not somebody that has any research experience, right? You're going to get somebody really green to come in as a brand new, either research assistant or a coordinator. So, I started saying working with the nursing school was very junior at the time in their research space. And they would come to me and they'd say, hey, I heard you have somebody that knows how to do, chart review in the medical record. Could I get some help with that? Or, oh, hey, we're having a problem with our data. And it was in like Access databases and Excel spreadsheets, and it was just a mess. So anyhow, took that all on and said, let me fix it for you. And while I was doing that, I was on a soapbox of how poorly investigator-initiated research support was, and also data. And data in particular really concerned me because, again, spreadsheets, Access databases built by students, and nobody could keep track of anything, and they didn't have documentation. I mean, just all the things that, not how I ran my studies, right? So I was like, wow, isn't this just second nature? People just don't know how to do this. Well, again, we didn't really have clear training. We didn't really have clear instructions. If you were working in investigator-initiated research in those early 2000 days, boy, you didn't have a clue. You were just, figuring it out as you went. So I, at that time, I said to the nursing school, hey, I have this idea. I'm getting requests from outside the School of Nursing from faculty I used to work with. They're interested in hiring parts of my staff. Can I do that? And they said, well, you can do it. We're just not going to give you any money to do it. So I said, well, okay, can I go ask for money? Worst thing somebody's going to tell me is no. So they said, well, yeah, you could go ask. You can go ask CTSA if they're interested in this concept. And I was like, okay. First CTSA we had, it was with Rob Califf. And I went to a couple of folks that worked with Rob and said, here's my idea. I pitched it to him. And they came back to me and they said, actually, this is a really good idea. We haven't been able to do it at a site-based scale for investigator-initiated research because we have the big academic CRO called the DCRI. Said, it's actually a pretty good idea. We'll give you a little bit of money, but comes with a caveat, this thing called REDCap. And I was like, research electronic data capture. And this is 2009. And I was like clueless about what this really meant. They sent me to a meeting at Vanderbilt. I sat down, I figured it out. And I was like, oh, actually, this is a really cool tool. We could do something with this. And they said, well, what we want you to do at Duke is roll this out. And we want you to really centrally support it, because every time we roll out a new piece of software with no support, it doesn't get adopted. And we think you could do something with this. So we did. And if you ask anybody at Duke about REDCap, everybody knows about REDCap, and everybody uses REDCap for every possible project, not just research, like administrative projects too. So in 2012, they came to me in January actually and said, hey, we like your little research management team concept in a little nursing school, because we were small then. And, could you bring it to the School of Medicine? And I was like, I don't know, maybe. What does that mean? And they said, oh, well, we'd like you to bring it to the School of Medicine and we'll make it bigger and you can support all these different projects in the School of Medicine. And I was like, ooh, cool idea. That sounds like an opportunity, right? So I talked with the nursing school and they said, okay, yep, sure. Sounds like a opportunity. It's really up to you if you want to do that. If you do that, you got to go first. We'll work out the details and then the team can come with you by July. I said, okay. So I did that. And I always say, be careful what you wish for, because it was like I had been hit in the face with a fire hose when I stepped into the School of Medicine. Everything was on fire. The current, at the time, clinical research support office was a giant mess. And these poor people, there were 14 people in that office at the time, and a couple of them remain with us today. And a couple of my original folks from that picture earlier remain with us today. And otherwise, everybody else has moved on, went to different jobs. Some people got different jobs at Duke, and that was really good for them because usually they were opportunities. But it was a very broken team. They were not paid attention to. They didn't have the right leadership. It was a very transactional office. You didn't do this right, send it back to us and we'll send it back to you. You didn't do it right, we'll send it back, back and forth. And I was like, this is not support. This is just, paperwork. We're just shuffling things. And I thought to myself, well, we can do this differently, because we can do it much like we do RMT, just bigger, right? So we became this one-stop shop concept. And initially everyone hated us. Hated us. And it wasn't a fun time in early 2012 there, but by July 2012, I convinced the dean's office. I said, hey, we are never going to get over this old reputation, so we need to rebrand when my team comes to join us from the nursing school. So we did that. We became Docker, and we really started digging in and saying, how can we support our investigators, our study teams? How can we improve training? How can we get into professional development? How can we do process improvement? And then finally getting into system support and things like that. So I tell you this because it's really important to understand the structure of Duke and how we've been able to change our clinical research professional jobs and everything else that goes with it. Because if you don't have a team like my team who's really going to jump in and help support this, it's really hard to convince the powers that be around you that it can be done and it can be sustained. And that's really important. You can't just put jobs on a piece of paper and walk away, right? You've got to really put a program together and support it. So today we're structured like this. We have the Vice Dean for Clinical Research. Actually, as of yesterday, Susanna became the Vice Dean for Clinical and Translational Research. And she's going to be heading up our CTSA, which I'm really excited about. She's been the interim since Ebony Boulware left to go be the dean at Wake Forest. So Docker now has two other research clinics actually that report into it. One is our early phase unit. Many of you have a GCRC type early phase unit. And then we have the Duke Research at Pickett, which is really our clinic. It's a research only clinic that was really spun up out of COVID that we've now converted to being a place that people can come and do research visits and all kinds of things like that. So, but it's research only. We don't do any standard of care there. Our units, we have 23 clinical research units at Duke, and they're all aligned with our clinical department centers and institutes. They all have a CRU director, a research practice manager, and a financial practice manager, and they're responsible for these items. So why do we do what we do? I like to bring everybody back. Like, why does the coordinator do what they do? Why does the data person do what they do? Why does the PI do what they do? We do what we do because we believe research is a collaboration. It's not a service. We'd be in private practice somewhere if it's a service, right? It's just you're bringing people in and you're getting paid per patient, right? And even though our contracts with industry are going to be set up like that, per patient costs, per milestones or whatever, it's still a collaboration. There's still intellectual property here. There's still a reason that we do what we do. And I like to remind my team all the time, research changes care. Every single person who's touching anything we do in clinical research is changing care. We're all part of it. And our therapies get better because we work on clinical research, right? The pandemic showed us that. I like to always use my example of when I was a dietitian intern in New York City, I used to have to go see breast cancer patients, right? If they were in the late stage breast cancer, that's it. That was all you wrote about it, right? Today, we have therapies where they can live as a chronic disease with stage 4 breast cancer. So it's a very different world today because of everything that you do and everything that has happened ahead of our times in terms of research. So just remember how important it is, how important your job is. I like to remind people how important everybody has in terms of what we're doing in terms of changing care. So we spent a lot of time changing the research culture, which is about putting the customer first. Now, your customer might be your patient. It might be a faculty member. It might be a staff member. It might be a student or a trainee. It could be anybody. So my philosophy is we all have to be kind. We have to be kind to everyone, have to understand what somebody's trying to tell you so that you can try to figure out how can you help. And that has to become part of what the mantra is around our clinical research enterprise. And then just working through things like community and trust and all of that we wanted to build partnerships, not only within our team and within our research community. I needed to build partnerships with the chief compliance officer, with corporate HR. I had to work with our compensation folks. Like I had to work with everybody across the institution and build those partnerships. But one of the things I knew we needed to do and had to do, and we had actually tried to do it once in I think it was 2009, 2010, when I was a research practice manager in the nursing school. And it failed miserably. And it's because it was tried and attempted at that RPM level, at the C or U level. When you elevate that person who just happened to be somebody who was in that role before, who knows about like some of these things that just didn't fly. And then I was in a leadership position. And then I was able to say, okay, I can work up, I can work across, and I can work down. And we can make this happen because our jobs were terrible. They really read like an admin position, out of something like Mad Men. It was terrible. And then I knew we needed career ladders because nobody could see where they were really headed. And that we needed to really be able to, once we had these jobs defined in a framework, I would know who we needed to train and develop, right? So just to kind of put it in some perspective, across the US, for every experienced CRC work that's looking for a job, there are 7 jobs posted. So guess what? We're living in a really competitive environment. All of us are, in terms of finding people who want to work at site-based research. So it's really important that we pay attention to this because we've got to give people a reason to want to work in academic medicine. It's not the same as industry. It doesn't pay the same as industry, but it can be equally rewarding, in my opinion, for the right person. If you're not in this for the money and you really enjoy your job and you get paid, I mean, I think people should be paid. Don't get me wrong. It's not free labor. And we shouldn't be doing things that we're underpaid for either, but we're never going to make the same. I'm always saying this to my teams is we don't pay the same as our industry partners down the street. And we're never gonna, but there's a lot of stability in an academic medical center. Even if you hear soft money at Duke now, somebody hears soft money and their job might go away. They know they've got people they can talk to and that they could probably find a position that someone else is hiring and they can go work in that space, right? So that just didn't exist before we had such good definitions around our job classifications. And you can see for nursing, it's even worse in regulatory affairs. This is from one of our papers from the unmeeting, and this was published in JCTS. And so this really talks about what are some of the barriers to successful recruitment and retention of this highly trained and diverse clinical research professional workforce. And, we've identified HR is a big one. Actually gave a talk at ACTS in April about this with a cadre of colleagues who were in very different phases, including Cincinnati, at adoption of some type of clinical research workforce overhaul, right? Resources are a real issue. We couldn't have done it if I hadn't hired an FTE who is Christine Dieter to really kind of herd the cats of all the work that was going on, because you're talking about all these different groups that we had to pull together. I needed institutional support. If you don't have that, you can't go very far with it. Remember the failed attempt. If the principal investigator is not engaged, we can't keep people. We will not keep people if PIs are not engaged with that individual. If you really treat that person like they're a transactional employee, as if they have no value, they are not going to stay in that job, because you're not going to feel like you appreciate them. They're not going to feel like all their work is worth it. And, the patients can keep you coming back only for so long, right? Or the participants. Training and professional development gaps, like it just was ill-defined. In many institutions, it remains ill-defined, or it's just all over the place, each department creating their own thing, and no consistency or standardization of expectations. And then outreach to potential new applicants, what we need today, a diverse workforce. We've got to be more inclusive. We've got to also think that maybe we're going to have to bring people in and train them up, right? We have to be more inclusive in what we think we need in terms of our research staff. And then we had the pandemic, and that of course was a big barrier, because now we have remote jobs everywhere, right? And when you're a coordinator, what do you have to do? You have to put patients on your studies. You have to recruit participants in. You can't do that completely over a Zoom call unless you have a completely remote study, which is just unlikely in almost all cases. We're going to have some level of decentralized trials, but I think that's going to be a mix of hybrid activity that sometimes people are already, showing up at the clinic, right? And you're going to meet them where they're at. You're not going to say, oh no, come back here, meet me over here, or we'll just do it over Zoom. We had to do a lot of that during the pandemic, but we have been slowly moving those things back as the clinical house has become, more open to typical clinical appointments, et cetera. So what are some of the issues with PIs and our faculty? They don't have time to manage staff. It's not necessarily the highest priority item that they didn't choose a faculty career so they could just manage staff all day long. And anybody who's managed staff knows there are rewards and there are not rewards related to being a manager. That's a tough job. And some people actually aren't very good at it. And that includes some of our faculty. They also may not understand our clinical research professional titles, or what they're expecting them to do, that there isn't a career ladder. It isn't the same as like looking at a professor who's like trying to obtain, tenure along the way, just starting to see staff as more of a cog in the wheel. They're just here to do this thing for me. Well, they'd like it to be more than that, because they actually have to have a lot of knowledge, right? You have to learn a lot in the regulatory space. You have to be able to talk to people if you're working in that space. So, it's not an easy job. And then, they may need training actually on creating an inclusive environment that values what the research professionals bring to the table. And then high quality staff, they can have a huge impact on how much back and forth is going on between that person and the IRB reviewer, right? If they don't know how to put an IRB together and they aren't doing a very good job of it, there's a lot of back and forth, which wastes a lot of time, right? So it can also affect things like data quality, publications, contracts, moving things along and staying on top of your work. You need people who can do that, right? And they're self-starters. And then inconsistency in the promotion of research professionals, which we have seen a lot of over the years, where people have their favorite person and they think that person is, the best thing since sliced bread, until they're not. And that's what I always say. That's the most amazing thing, is like, this person is the greatest thing, the greatest thing, the greatest thing, until they're not. And then this person over here, this faculty member, I'll just even speak for like some of the faculty I've worked with. They're like, I need this person to go away. Like, they're not very good. They're not doing a good job. And I was like, well, how do we go from this to this? Because that didn't happen overnight. And of course, HR is going to say to you, hey, you need a lot of documentation to show me that that's actually the case, right? So that can be very, very frustrating. And so we see a lot of different things happen. We also would see a lot of things based on cost. Oh, I have a funded trial. It's only an R21. So I'm just going to hire this person. They're a research assistant. I really need them to do a coordinator level work, but I'm going to give them all that work to do anyway. And that's not really fair, right? Maybe you're giving somebody an opportunity to get in the door, but there just was no consistency and standardization across our group. So this is that model of the socio-technical ecosystem of all the things I think that are impacting our clinical research environment and our professionals. And this is from another unmeeting paper, which I was not a co-author on, but Stephanie Friel from my team was on this as well. And you'll see here that there's just so many things that are impacting what's going on. So we have all these different stakeholders. We have all the different financials. We have silos in our institution. We have the regulatory pressures. And then we have all these things going on across the organization that impact this system, right? And that, we need institutional training. We have to require it. How do we find them? How do we find our research professionals? Are they centralized? Are they department? We have a mix at Duke. Then, you get into the needs for professional practice and a community of practice, really, of our staff. And we have something at Duke called a Research Professionals Network, which has been really good because it brings those folks together. They opt in to participate in something like that. So you're just trying to give people a place to feel like they are heard. And that, we recognize that across different institutions, there's a real lack of these institutional champions, people who need mentorship and leadership and are really dedicated to this group of individuals. They're a huge group of individuals at most institutions that are doing clinical research, because that you don't just have a few clinical research professionals. You have a lot when you have a large portfolio of work that, crosses industry and federal, and also probably some internally funded projects and things like that. So I won't spend too much more time on that. But so how, as an academic medical center, how do you do this? Like, how do you hire? How do you train? How do you onboard if you don't even know who they are, right? So one of the things I have really tried to focus on at Duke and really talk about widely is that we need to create a professional identity. So we did a lot of this work, and it's taken us since 2014 to march through this. And I'm going to go through a set of slides here, but just keep in mind how long we've been working on this. So in 2014, we built out, we took the JTF framework here, this wheel from Stephen Sonstein and crew. And we really said, you know what, this is perfect. I've got something. I put this in front of a couple of vice deans. I put it in front of HR. I put it in front of compensation. And I said, we have to do something like this. I don't know how. I haven't quite figured out how we're going to take this concept on paper and actually make it into these jobs, but we'll begin to work on it. If everyone agrees, I can take this forward. And I got some leadership buy-in. We established governance. We established working groups. We worked with the departments. We established essentially like a core group of people, and then our faculty also. And we spent 2 years just building this project, right? And really kind of developing out these competencies and stuff. And we often say we Dukeify the competencies, because you couldn't just take something on a piece of paper and say, oh, that's we'll just put that into a job description. We really had to try to craft these so that they really made sense for how you're going to do this job at Duke. And this example here is safety and ethics, where you really get into adverse events, and then all the different things that go into reporting of adverse events. Is it all these different criteria around it? Does it have to go to the IRB? Does it need to go to sponsor? What are some of the criteria that you really need to understand? And these were the building blocks of our competencies in our job descriptions. So we updated our job descriptions so they more accurately reflected our job responsibilities. We identified the competencies and the performance criteria that needed to sit in the different classifications. We defined a career ladder and the career progression of those ladders, which I will show you a snip of. And then we ensured our staff members were performing clinical research functions were actually classified appropriately. So remember, getting to some level of standardization across the organization. And then we mapped those positions into rework job classifications. So we took people who were in the job and moved them into the new job, and then we posted new jobs. And we made all that happen on the same day. And then we incorporated job classifications across both the School of Medicine and Nursing. And that was the scope of who was impacted at Duke. We did not go into campus. Campus actually operates under a different IRB. In the Duke Health, which School of Nursing and School of Medicine are part of, the covered entity, we decided those were the jobs we needed to focus on. That's where most of the research was going into the biomedical IRB. All right, so we took 80 job classifications. We did all this pre-work around mapping. We sat down with HR folks. We sat down with our CRU folks, and we said, okay, here are the people that are showing up on the list. Here's their current position. This is what they're mapping to based on something called, it was called a map. We had a sort of a mapping tool at the time, which has actually evolved into this thing called the title picker. But this mapping tool essentially had listed out all the different kinds of competencies and what somebody would select that they needed to do. And then there were levels associated with that. Is it fundamental? Is it skilled? Is it advanced? And that's kind of how we determine different based on an algorithm, like where did those things fall and what kind of job do they need to be in? Do they need to be in a clinical research coordinator job, or was it more of a senior job? Or was it more portfolio management and project management with some level of clinical research activity in it? That's going to be more in this research program leader category, right? So we created this set of ladders. Everything that has these blue bars underneath it, all of these and above, those are all our exempt job classifications. And then these two down here, the clinical research specialist jobs, they're both non-exempt. So they're hourly jobs. And we put different criteria around those jobs. And then those actually map to other things across the institution, perhaps access, how they get access to the medical record. These jobs are going to get more of a view-only type job. We have a special template in our Epic system for this job that's different than the research coordinator, which is different than the clinical nurse coordinator. So there were just different things where because I was the central team, and again, I mentioned coverage analysis. We also have the Epic team sits with my office. I mean, it's just, I've tried to create an organization that is just, well, super organized around clinical research, but also everything starts to talk to each other, right? Instead of something happening out here that we have no idea that it's going on, we try to really make sure that those communications and things are just tied together. So that was helpful to us too, because we could map these jobs to also these research templates and other things that were happening in Epic. So at the time, we mapped about 700 people in 2016. And then today, as of Q3, we are 903 clinical research professionals, with 45% of them making up the CRCs. So we're big. We created something called this Research Professionals Network. We used to meet in person like this, and I kind of miss those days where we would have these big once a month professional level topics, might be on best communication strategies, or, maybe preparing your resume or CV or those types of things. Not that we want people to always be looking for other jobs, but we do want them to stay professional and fresh. And as you get promoted, you often are asked for your CV or your resume in order to move up to another job. So there's a lot of things that we want to make sure that people are staying on top of. And so we try to offer those types of topics. And then today, and our mapping tool has become the title picker. It's automated. It works really smoothly. We have 2009 have been submitted since 2016. So those get submitted, and then that goes to the HR person. The HR person then posts the job. It's super smooth. Generally speaking, if there's any kind of conflict or somebody doesn't agree with what's come out of the title picker, our team will meet with them and understand what it is that is correct or not correct about what they submitted. I talked about tier advancement. This is really driven by the employee. It's really about building competencies without making a position change. So again, you're staying in the job, you're building your toolbox and you're moving along and you're getting a raise when that happens. When you go from tier 1 to 2, you get a 3% raise, from 2 to 3, a 5% raise. And we really want people to stay in the job. It's good for the research. It's good for the participants in terms of their retention. And it's really good for the individual to not be so worried about what's next, what's next, what's next. If you're doing a really great job, you will never have to ask what's next. Other things will come find you. All right, so this has really been about building a community. And last year advancement, I sent almost 100 individual emails to every single person who tier advanced. And I got some incredible responses. This was one of my favorites. And I asked Charlotte, I was like, can I share that someday? You're going to have a problem with me sharing it. I'll leave it anonymous if you want me to, but I'd really like to share this comment. And she said, absolutely. I'm happy for you to do that. So I'll just leave this on the screen. I'm not going to read it to you, but it was just so, for me, I was like, why did I wait so long to send messages out to people to tell them congratulations? I don't know why it occurred to me just last year, but anyway, we did it. It was a great experience for me too, because I want them to know I know, and I want folks to know that I care. And I'm not just this associate dean and I've done this project and I'm just kind of like dropping the mic and walking away. Like, this is a program to me, and it's a community builder. In 2019, we took a step back and said, okay, let's fix our training. Okay, now that we've got this framework, we've got competencies, let's also align all of our training with competencies. So now everything kind of aligns there. It's really sweet. I'm really excited about what my team has done with this. We have a trainer manager. Her name's Jessica Cranfield, and she is incredible at making things so smooth and easy. And of course, a lot of this is all online these days. We also then branched into comprehensive onboarding plans. These are very specific to try to get folks to, really, we want to introduce them to these different modules. We have these things called express starts. When you first come to Duke, you hit the ground running with some very clear guide on what to do. Our units can use these comprehensive plans to, they can really tweak these templates and add in things, and they can really specify them to the different research that they're doing. And then we really get into we have these packets that folks can use almost as a, kind of a learning tool to apply the information. And then in 2022, we designed something called new hire cohorts. One of the things we were learning is that staff were coming in and they didn't know other people, right? They're coming in, they might be working with a specific team. They weren't meeting other new people, right? Because they're not all hired into the same team. So we established these new hire cohorts. And so that has mentors that come from the community that might be in these other positions, or maybe they're in the CRC tier 3 or something like that. Or they're wanting to tier up. So they're going from a 2 to a 3. And so they decide to join the cohorts, or they're senior level folks that really want to give back. So they do a lot of mentoring as part of this series. And we've had to date 62% of our new hires have volunteered to be part of these cohorts. It's been really fun to see. And I've done some of those sessions. So how has we are helped? We feel like it's helping us expand to other areas of clinical research. We're getting ready to do a clinical research data management. That's underway. We expect that to happen by the end of the calendar year. So we'll have some additional ladders. We'll have like 3 more positions that ladder up in the data space. It's allowed us during COVID to really pivot people very quickly. We've been able to really get employees to be recognized for advancement in their growth opportunities. There's been budgeted support as part of my operational budget for this program, and also in corporate HR and folks like that feel like they have budgets now to help support what's going on. And they just love it because it's much more defined and streamlines a lot of their work. And then in FY22, we had a market analysis that was done with our jobs, and I kept staying ahead of it during COVID. And it led to a 9% adjustment across all our 12 jobs. And that could have never happened before when we had 80 job classifications. So I'll just share with you some data. So our 3-year average was 23% attrition prior to this 2016 launch of our implementation of our jobs. And then 3 years post, it went to about 16%, which was like a 30% improvement, which was pretty awesome. And then you can see we track this now by fiscal year because I get all the data once a month, and one of my data folks just churns out the data and creates these nice little line charts for me to talk about. But these are our voluntary terminations right now. As of the Q3, we're sitting at around 11%. It will not end there at the end of the fiscal year. We have another quarter to capture. We lose a lot of people in the last quarter. If you ever track your data, you can see that you have a lot of gap year students and folks that are going to go on to grad school, and they make different decisions at the end of the fiscal year. So we lose more people in that time frame. So I expect this probably to end up around 14 or 15% at the end of the fiscal year, but still, hands down, much better than we were doing before. And you can see we were really starting to see an improvement in our turbulence rates, which is really when people switch jobs from one department to another, but don't leave the institution. And so there was just so much job hopping back in the day because, again, remember I said things weren't very standardized. So wealthy department might post a higher level job, but the person's doing a lower level amount of work, or vice versa. So there was a lot of job hopping back then. So it's important to work with HR. You want to make them a partner in the process and really do things at an enterprise-wide level, find the right leadership, all that kind of thing, and then really get them to come to the table and be involved in the conversation. This isn't just me dumping information on you. What do you need? What do you care about? Guess what they care about? They care about equity a lot. They want things to be equitable. So when you start saying to them, hey, this is not standardized across the institution, we've got some real problems here, they will start to listen. My team's always willing from Duke to talk with other HRs as well. And I think that they've also talked with some folks from Cincinnati. So this really gives us some insight insight into what's going on with our career pathways, et cetera. So what happens if we don't do something? So Rob Califf, Rob, who's now the head of the FDA, who gave me some CTSA money and CTSA 1.0 at Duke, he's always talking about, we've got to fix this evidence generation system. We have to do something about how we're taking ideas and innovating them because they're getting stalled out in the implementation, right? And a big part of that is actually staffing and the workforce. And there was like this tiny little mention of it in the paper. And I said, well, you know what? We need to write a different paper. We need to write the similar message, but it's about the workforce. If we don't have the folks in the middle, we are not going to actually get this work done. So because there's not always a lot of focus on how important the clinical research workforce is. So that paper's coming out soon in clinical trials. So we talk about these things. I've mentioned many of them. I'm not going to spend too much time on it because I keep saying, hey, we have a lot of research going on and we don't have enough people, right, for those jobs that are being posted. So let me just skip here. So what do you do though? I just want to highlight a few of these slides, and one of them is take homes, right? Because I don't need to read them back to front for you. But, if you lose people along the way, don't panic. Examine what your team needs. You're in a different place than when you started with that person in that job, right? So sometimes things change. Sometimes you have different initiatives planned. You can reassess what you want this person to do. Hopefully you can start to work towards better transition plans too, when it comes to studies and staffing, because you don't want to halt research if you don't have to. So talked a little bit about talent before. This is just your natural aptitude and sort of those inner qualities that you have. They're just without effort. I am really outgoing. It's easy for me. It is not hard for me to do a presentation. But, if I have to quietly go off and reflect and write, that sometimes is harder for me to do, right? It's just not my personality to just sit down, sit still. I'm terrible at sitting still. So anyhow, that's talent. Skills, definitions, these are acquired abilities. These are learned. A lot of times this is stuff that you can train and you can teach, okay? And these are just some examples of both talent and skill. And when you're recruiting and hiring folks, these are just some of the things to think about. Like, what are you looking for? Look beyond what the typical requirements are for the job. Look at some of their hobbies, their interests. Sometimes it can lend a lens in on what they might be good at and what they might contribute for your team. And then just really think about your candidate in terms of like how they're responding to your questions, and be very structured about those questions, because your interviews matter. And then these are just some other things to think about when you are looking at resumes and scanning letters and things like that. And then good humans. I always say our team matters. And I don't want to hire people in who think they're better than the rest of the team. We're all better together. And, that was the clinical trials day. Together, we can, right? So we can do things together, but we can't do them when we're all sitting in our own little silos. So I believe research changes care. I liked my team to think that. And that finally, we always say good humans are kind to all people. And then onboarding, I had mentioned some of those things. We also do this in my team. And then be engaged, encourage development, and prevent burnout amongst your team as much as you can. Try to watch out for the workload, look for things that they need to open up about and talk to you about so that you can help them, right? You can't help them if they're not telling you and communicating with you about it. Encourage things like submissions of posters, presentations. Try to get them to a meeting if you can, depending on what they're working on. I did some of that, and that was actually very helpful to me. And this is all about making those human connections. So I'm just going to leave you with a few takeaways. Timing of infrastructure and building trust and change all happens at a good time, right? So for Duke, it was a good time in 2012. Tough job, good time. And then we got into the research culture. It's really important that you think about all of the things that you can impact by making one change, right? And where can those things lead you? And then just think about what are some of the barriers to recruiting and retaining staff. Sometimes it's our jobs. And consider those competency-based jobs and career ladders if you can. And think about how you can get involved and do something and contribute and be a volunteer and make things better in terms of work groups. I think that we solicit people like all over our campus to try to work on different initiatives and things that are going on. And then you've heard about what happens if we don't do something. We're going to stall out the research because there's just not going to be enough people to do it. And then always look for good humans and talent when you're hiring. And that's it. Oh,
And everyone, I just have to say, Denise did a 2-hour presentation at the Association of Clinical Research Professionals on the same presentation. So that's why she just took a deep breath. So thank you so much, Denise. I'll let you take another deep breath. And Christy Gilliam, who's from our HR in College of Medicine, is saying, thank you, Denise. But let me allow everyone to, yes, she's giving us the wave. Thank you, Christy.
See you again. Thank you for your contributions in working on this.
Yeah, so let me allow everyone to unmute themselves if they would like to take a moment to say thank you or just say Happy Clinical Trials Day. Cope is saying this is beautiful. She's been texting me to let me know I want this. So yes, if you'd like to say a comment, a question, does anybody have questions? Yes, Cope says, I'm going to send the link from this presentation to all of our leadership. She's in internal medicine, so that's exciting as well. Janelle says, thank you. Anybody else would like to ask a question? I did mention in the chat that this will be on CTR Online, and I'll publish it hopefully next week, if not today, working with our communication specialist. So Cope is asking, how did you get buy-in from HR?
So there were a few things. So I had mentioned that we had the failed attempt, which happened when I was a research practice manager in the nursing school. And the individual who had worked with me on that project, her name is Heather Gador, and Christine's probably met her over Zoom and stuff. But she and I were really at this manager level at that point in our careers, right? So it failed, it didn't do well. But when I took this job, I went to her and I said, look, I've got Epic going in 2013. Like I got all kinds of things going down that I'm like dealing with like fire hose on everything. But I said, I just want you to put this on your radar right now that I want to tackle this project for our institution. I don't know how we're going to do it, but we need to do something about these jobs. I said, you understand because you're the analyst. You get the information that's coming from all these different places, departments, faculty, staff, managers, all these people asking you for clinical research jobs all the time. And do they ever ask you something that makes complete sense? Is it ever the same? And she's like, no, it's never the same. Like, I always have to sit there and pull it apart. And she used to say, it gave me pause and it gave me heartburn because I never really understood the level of work, because somebody would say, oh, it's all this, and meanwhile, they'd get the person hired because they were somebody they wanted to hire into this job, but they really didn't need this job. They needed this job, right? So the inequity, like, I'm telling you, she will tell you, she's like, equity matters to HR. It matters a lot. And when you are dealing with FLSA regs and MQs and all this other things, which is your minimum qualifications, those things are key. They're just key fundamental words for and definitions that HR really understands and can really start to understand. Oh, we don't do this the same way everywhere, and while at the same time, so they want equity, and then my faculty, right? The faculty are like, oh, well, my person's different. My person's different. My person's different. Everybody's different. I'm like, okay, we can't all be unicorns. So let's get some standardization around what you want them to do. Are they doing consent? Yes. Okay. Well, let's talk about the complexity of your research. Is it minimal risk? Is it, greater than minimal risk? Are you doing drug device trials? Are you doing, what are you doing? And start to put these things into perspective for someone like HR. And so when I brought them the framework, honestly, I brought them the paper and said, look at this. And they were like, oh, there's a lot of words on a piece of paper. But they took a look at the wheel and they said, okay, this might actually help us frame this and redo these jobs. And before you all got on, I told Stephanie, I gave a talk today to our clinical research or clinical department business managers. So it's our centers, our institutes, folks that I don't interact with regularly. But, when I was going through this project, I had to go to them too, and I had to get their buy-in because there was going to be a financial bottom line to this, right? It costs money when you put jobs together like this and suddenly you have market analysis, people get paid better. It makes more sense, all those kinds of things. But I took this project back to them. I gave them a little update because we're actually going to add the data jobs and I needed their approval that we could go down that road. And they had no questions for me other than comments, which were, we need to do this throughout Duke for all of our different bucketed jobs, admin assistants. They were naming all kinds of jobs that they really felt like if we would just make things competency-based, organized, and standardized across these departments, we would have an easier time understanding what people's roles and responsibilities are and how to train them. So some of that was the buy-in.
That's awesome. So Emily Worf, hi, Emily. Would you like to unmute or would you like me to ask your question? I'm going to ask the question in for the interest in time. How were you financially supported while doing all this work? It seems like you would not have effort on studies if you were so busy doing this stuff. And Emily is in emergency medicine.
Mm-hmm. You mean me personally, or?
Yes.
Yeah. I didn't have any effort on studies at this point, except for the CTSA. And a piece of what we wrote into the CTSA actually ended up building out on this. So we had a little bit of CTSA money, and I think it was CTSA 2.0. And we had touched on, we wanted to do some things related to the workforce, but hadn't really evolved that yet because when that grant went in was before the Joint Task Force wheel had come about. But once we hit that 5-year cycle and we went into 3.0 CTSA, one of our aims was actually highly focused or hyper-focused actually on really expansion of workforce innovation and all the workforce engagement stuff that we had done. So that was the only funding that I had personally. Now on my team, I actually hired one FTE to essentially be a project coordinator of everything that was happening related to the project, herding everybody from HR, herding all the input from our vice deans, hurting the faculty pilots and things like that that we did. So all of that. And then I have operational support from the dean's office for my whole team. Not everybody on the team has operational dollars, but there was a few folks that had some operational dollars. So we would use operational dollars to sort of, again, this is a school-wide initiative so that we could work with all the different groups. And the thing is this isn't just Docker and my team, right? These are all the jobs across our 23 clinical research units, which is one of the reasons in the early part I wanted to explain like our infrastructure, because nobody hires somebody to work in clinical research and say the Department of Medicine and doesn't use these jobs. Everybody uses these jobs, right? We have much better standardization now across those units, and we just don't have the problems. It's really streamlined a lot of the activity. And from an HR standpoint, HR loves this because this is explainable. It's, it's used regularly in any kind of their market analysis. And then what my team see is they're like, okay, people understand what we do now. And that was not really the case before we did such a large project, but it's a good question. And our staff, they don't have to do a lot of work on this except for anything that's related to their professional development, which I would say is a mix. You might do some professional development as part of your job, but there's a lot of professional development that we all do that's outside our job, right? That's our responsibility.
So we're going to move on to their title picker. Everybody wants to know about the title picker.
The title picker is a shareable tool. It can be, if you go to, I think I had the website up, and that is downloadable and it's in REDCap. So, I mean, you can upload it and we have a data dictionary and everything that goes with it. And our team is always willing to meet with you and kind of walk through, like, how would you adopt it? How would you put it into your instance? I mean, it's easy to put it into your instance. It's then another thing to like say, okay, how would this work with our jobs? And actually, University of Alabama, Birmingham, they have adopted pretty much this framework. But they adopted our title picker and they've got that working now. And I think Kentucky is looking at it now. There's a number of different groups that have taken it and tried to adopt it to their institution. I always say you have one AMC, right? We're not all shaped the same. We don't have the same approach to anything. So you still have to work through the confines of your own, your own structure. But as much as you can use whatever we've built, we always say, here it is, it's for free.
So a specific question on the title picker from Andrea Meisman, the Children's. Is there an option to estimate if the task will require 1 FTE or more or less? And Andrea, I'm sure you want to unmute and talk to Denise.
No, we don't. We don't estimate based on FTEs. It's generally the individual will go in and fill out the title picker, and they'll just pick off the tasks. And you can pick off 100 tasks if you want and say they'll be 1% each, or you could pick off, 10 tasks and say they're 10% each, or maybe some are more weighted than others or something like that. But that's what gives you the general job description. And then a lot of times people will tailor that to their different needs based on their, what they're hiring that CRC to do, type of studies, that sort of thing. But generally they'll do a general job description and then they can have something that's a bit more tailored. But at least the job title and position and expectations and roles and responsibilities behind it, along with the minimum qualifications, are all the same, right? For the posting and things like that. And then I did see Elizabeth here also asked about the title picker if it's published. It is not published yet, but we have it almost ready to go out the door. So I'm expecting that to go out the door in the next month. So hopefully we'll have it published here this year.
Great. Cope's saying this is Elizabeth. We call her Cope.
Yeah, that's okay. It's not in REDCap. You go to our website, and our website, if you typed in DOCR WER and like push that into Google, put a space between Docker and we are, that'll come up to our webpage for Workforce Engagement and Resilience. And that's going to have all of our stuff. You can scroll down. There's a few buttons that go across, and then there's a bunch of accordions where you can get different pieces of our materials. If for some reason you can't find it, you can't download it, our website's blocking you for some reason, firewall, whatever, just email us and we'll send it to you. She found it. Perfect.
We have very resourceful people that are very passionate about this topic. So between Cope and Andrew, I wouldn't doubt it.
We want, you need passion. Let me just tell you, you're not going to carry
right.
a project forward without it.
That is right.
You have to be persistent and kind. You know, I found that I get people with the honey a lot faster than, you know, if I'm just vinegar.
That's right. And Copes, thank you for the presentation. Anyone else that would like to ask a question? You've all stayed on and entertained Denise, and really, this has been a great presentation. We've received so many positive comments in the chat, and everyone has said that they're going to share with their leadership. And Christy Gilliam, who's our HR rep, is so excited about that too. So
that's good. That helps her socialize it, because that's the other thing. You got to socialize.
That's
I mean,
right.
we did a lot of memos, but we also did a lot of town halls at the time, which were in person back then. But I mean, we did town hall after town hall after town hall. And a lot of those were really focused on the research community staff themselves. Even though they were excited about it, they were scared about it. They're like, "Ooh, what happens to me?" Right? So we actually mapped in 2 different waves. We did what we called our first scoop, which was everybody we could identify. And then it was like everybody came out of the woodwork all of a sudden. Everyone's like, well, I actually do that. I do that. Because they saw the positive things that had been happening to this first cohort of folks that we mapped, the first scoop of people. And then that second scoop of people was really kind of that 700. And we were like, okay, this is our starting point, you know? Anyhow, it's been fun. Like you said, I could talk about it all day long.
All day long, we could. That's why we let you guys in a little bit late, just because we were just talking all about it. So details of what's going on at her institution. So
I have really appreciated being here, especially at Clinical Trials Day. That was a good timing.
Yes. Anything else? Thank you so much, Denise. She's such a great partner to work with. If you have any questions, feel free to contact myself or Angela Mendel, Jackie Kanapke, even Cope. Nate Harris is on the call too. Emily Worth knows how to get in touch with us. She works with us in the CCTST. Please, and we're happy to talk, get in touch with Denise. Denise will take your email anyway, but she's a very busy woman, as you know now.
This is fun stuff, though. I have to say, when you have those fun pet projects, this is one of my, fun ones, and one that's probably nearest and dearest to my heart, because I was a coordinator, and it's just, you do a lot.
It's the truth. And so I want to end with Cassie's comments, because she just thought you were so positive, and we need this on Clinical Trials Day. So Cassie Kirby said, this talk is so good. It's so nice to hear this perspective and history from someone who has walked the walk and is so positive. Love it. Every CRC needs to hear this. As a CRC on this ladder for the last 19 years at Children's and 3 years at UC before that, I love this. This is why I stayed in the field, because I believe in the value, and that it truly does change care. So thank you for your leadership, Denise.
You're very welcome.
And collaboration with us. We do really appreciate it. And you are changing the landscape of the CRPs. So thank you.
We will all do it together. Together
Yes.
we can.
We can, for sure. Thank you, Emily. She is also saying it is very good to see someone who sees us and sees our hard work. So what a great way to end. Thank you so much. Have a great weekend, everyone, and happy Clinical Trials Day. Thank you, Denise.
Bye.
Bye-bye, everyone.
Have a great weekend.
You too.